Is just address what the purpose of the workshop is, really. It's printed on these agendas. There's a couple copies. There's printed about 25 copies here. It's really just to get a better understanding of harmful algal blooms as they relate to the harmful algal blooms are in Devil's Lake. Presentations, I gotta slow down instead of worry about speaking, are meant to inform the public, inform the board, inform staff relative to what can be done about harmful algal blooms. It's really not a decision-making process. The board isn't going to say, we're going to go after alum treatments, we're going to go after something else today. That would have to come later. So this is informational. The objective is to cover as much information as possible and take on clarifying questions as they may come up. But with a group this size, if there's one question in the last 5 minutes, we're never even going to get through the presentation. So if there's some information that doesn't seem clear, please raise your hand. We'll call on you. We'll try to answer that question and then keep moving through the presentation. At the end, there's considerations for next steps, which the board can maybe provide some guidance to staff, or maybe it's just time to regroup and we'll just say, okay, what's the next meeting date, et cetera, et cetera. With us today, Joe Eilers. Joe is a professional hydrologist in water quality with the American Institute of Hydrology, certified lake manager with North American Lake Management Society, certified fisheries biologist, American Fisheries Society, has a master's in water resources management from the University of Wisconsin, and a bachelor's from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Joe has done a tremendous amount of work on this lake in the past. He is the expert on Devil's Lake as far as data collection, and in fact, just last summer he was doing some work for us. So very informed. We're happy that he could come out here on a couple days' notice and provide some information to us today. Also joining us today is a gentleman by the name of John Fonseca. John is from Advanced Aquatic Solutions, and he's just going to, his specialty is in aeration, and he heard about this meeting. Apparently his twin brother lives in Lincoln City. He's come down, and so as far as somebody in the industry, some industry knowledge there too. So for me, I'm just going to provide a quick update on the harmful algal blooms. Quick hit. Who made it to the meeting on Thursday? Okay, who was able to see the presentation too? Okay, so fair share. That meeting is available online too. So
Paul, do you have any agendas?
they're out on the tables, yeah.
There's about 25 is what they have.
Yeah.
So there's no more?
Well, there are, I'm sure
I
people that
have
don't.
one, there's several people that don't.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. Let's see where we're.
Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. So, yeah. Harmful algal blooms. This is a chart that I want people to be familiar with. This is what you'll see on the website. You'll see out in the field. This has been our kind of presentation data associated with harmful algal blooms for 2 or 3 years now, stemming back even from 2007, as we've been sampling harmful algal blooms since 2007. Data that would have been, skip the slide. Oh, okay, well, basically, if anybody's been to the water, the bloom is gone. It's unbelievable how it just changed. The clarity of the lake is 5 meters. Deepest point in the lake is like 6.5 meters. So it's all the way to the bottom, lake-wide, you can see it. Toxins, we ran toxin analysis on 4 different toxins that are typical of the ones the state asked you to analyze: microcystin antitoxin, saxitoxin, and slimnospermopsin. All you need to know is that not only were they all below the advisory levels, which are shown here, 10, 20, 100, and 6, they're all below the detection limit, which for these analyses is like 0.15 or something on that order. So significantly below the threshold and all below detection limit. We also have some in-house work that we did. We tested 10 sites in the last couple days. All were below basically detection. I'll just say one quick.
This was run though after the bloom. Did you guys
Correct.
run any tests to see what the toxins were during the balloon last?
No, this is the data from Friday a week ago. The composite.
Should we test when the balloon was going on?
I could answer that. So our monitoring program, as you may know, has been developed over the last, like I said, since 2007. And our peak recreation period is typically Memorial Day to Labor Day. And that's when we monitor the lake for E. coli and anything else in the lake. Typically you get your blooms in the summertime, as you may know. Winter blooms, not unusual. We've had many of them in the past. They tend to be a little bit more isolated along the shorelines, maybe 10, 20, 30% of lake, not 100% of lake. So this bloom did take over the lake, and I think is really is informative as to how we may proceed with future monitoring.
Have you tested the water that I brought to Thursday's meeting?
That got doused with dye.
I saw that, but it could
Yeah.
still have been tested, correct?
May have been tested, but I doubt we would have had anything informative. It's about $1,000 to run that test, so it wouldn't have just been a simple thing to do. I mean, the resources were, I think, well spent in finding out if, in fact, the current data are what the state of the lake was at this point.
Excuse me, I just think it's odd when the bloom took over the whole lake that no test was done. It's totally out of the ordinary.
Well,
Going forward, if that were to happen again, you might.
that's what I suggested, correct, right. So,
I think it should be, that to me doesn't make sense.
yeah, well, again, the district with limited resources, we don't have enough money to spend $1,000 each week for sure.
But that's a great.
So clarifying questions, I'll try to answer them.
That was a major problem on the lake.
So, yeah, and I think it's definitely something that the board will revisit as far as what their policy is, as far as what's the monitoring to look like henceforth. My estimation is it'll be just a year-round monitoring program. We'll have to budget for that. Certainly the harmful algal bloom portion of that, even in the summertime, we don't go out and test the toxicity like weekly, because again, that's $1,000 or a few $100, and certainly a full day of staff. What we do is we monitor.
What is it? Is it 100 or 1,000? I mean, and when I say that, because you're using that as a reason why we wouldn't want to do it. And I think
No,
it's
fair question. So, the monitoring that we do in-house, we have a couple different methodologies that we can do. You have little strip tests, which are about $25 a strip test. So if you did the whole lake, you're into $250 right there, one sample. The same thing's true with the quantitative analysis that we do, and we do that lake-wide. You're basically into about $250 a day sample. So if you only did, that's why I kind of threw a range in there for the 100, because you could do a few strip tests around the lake and kind of try to gauge what was maybe happening relative to the whole lake. Best estimate, find like the worst spot. Be a little bit more strategic versus just more routine. And you can bring that number down to a few $100, $100 maybe a day, a sample day. If you go out and you want to test microcystic antitoxin, saxitoxin, and Slimm's spermopsin, you're up to about $1,000 a sample, not just, so like maybe $10,000 if you were to test the whole lake, all 10, 12 sites. Okay.
Paul, can I ask a follow-up or a
Sure.
comment on that? One of the things, and I appreciate all the information that you've given us in the last week on what the levels are, but one of the things that would be really nice for me, who is not a water biologist or scientist in any form, is, like when I go in and get my blood drawn, I get on the right-hand side of the paper, it tells me what normal high average is.
Yeah, that's
And
on the
so if you
website,
could give
and I
us
can
levels,
add that to this
that would
slide.
be
I could add
awesome.
this to the slide, but let me see if we could pull the website up later to the website. You'll see what the thresholds are for antitoxin, spermopsin. It's all there up on the website right now as well. The other,
One question, the testing, is it done in-house or do we have our own lab or is that sending it out?
both.
Both.
Yeah. So we test microcystin, which is one of the toxins in-house, and we have two methodologies for that. And then to do external, the other three toxins, we have to send that out.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the data set that you would have received if you had an email that was sent to the district for your listserv. You would have got this yesterday. And the day before, you would have got something similar to this with about half as much data because we added the last bits. So these are all the sites that we tested with the test kit. Regatta grounds to basically the whole lake. We only had, we skipped the campground at Deaver for reasons of quantities of test we had. This number here, 115 cells per mil, was from a week ago. Now that is telling you how many cells are in, actually organisms are in the water. That's an important number relative to thresholds as well. And if I go back a slide, you'll see that that is also listed here, the threshold, 100,000. So right, as of a week ago, we had 115 per mil, and we're talking 115 in this size. You have to be 100,000 per mil for that species to list. So again, the bloom is basically gone. So clarity, the Secchi depth, I mentioned that. You can see 17 feet to the bottom basically of the lake yesterday. Oxygen levels are rebounding. When the bloom crashed, all that has to rot and die. Okay, that takes a lot of oxygen. And so what we had is oxygen levels really dropping out in the lake. Through mixing, through wind-driven mixing predominantly, the oxygen is returning. Lake-wide is about 70 to 75% of normal 1 second. The actual concentration is actually more important, above 7 to 8 parts per million, which is well within the range of even the more sensitive trout fish.
Well, did this kill fish?
So the bloom, there were, I don't know, 3 dozen maybe fish that were killed at regatta grounds that were found. The Fish and Wildlife had stocked them the day before, so they were all their adult fish. Certainly the stress of being put in a lake that was at the time very much in bloom was a consideration. They, the Fish and Wildlife realized that there was a bloom there. They decided to plant them there. They did lose a percentage, probably 0.1% of their fish. What we hadn't seen though is anything widespread. So if you would have had fish from Holmes Road to Sand Point to Deep River, then that would have been a different story. Fortunately, that did not happen, to our knowledge.
One of the things that I've observed, maybe someone else in the room has, but I've not seen an egret in 2 weeks, or a heron.
One heron. I saw a heron yesterday, so that's a good point. Okay. pH is in the normal range, temperature is given there, conductivity is in the normal range. The only thing that's really kind of still out of whack is the oxygen levels, which are rebounding. So that's good. Lake level this morning, 9.36 feet above sea level. Of course, the maximum impoundment is 9.53, you may know. The week during the bloom, it was 9.75, right? So it was higher than what the lake level could have been impounded in any time of the year. Quick question.
Except the bloom started in June.
Actually, this bloom started in late January.
No, Paul, the lake has been green since June.
It actually crashed. It crashed in November. You know, we
Almost every single day.
delisted the bloom in November. We actually are very cautious about how we delist the bloom because, again, it's $1,000 to delist it. You have to go through all those steps. So we probably could have tried to delist it late October.
Do you hear everybody, I hear everybody in here saying there has been a bloom all summer,
May not be
all
toxic,
winter.
but it was a
Yeah.
bloom.
Well, even the cell counts were well below what the bloom thresholds are. So using the samples that collected from the lake, I guess that's just not supported. But I do appreciate it, and I do know that there was a small lingering of a little bloom, maybe, but it wasn't a full bloom.
You're not on the lake every
Okay,
single
thank
day.
you, thank you for the question.
Is there?
We can't, I don't, it's not, this isn't meant to be argumentative today. We have a lot to cover, and, you know, the real goals are to provide information, to move forward in solutions. That's certainly the goal of this workshop.
We're all seeing the color. Is there an explanation for the green color outside the bloom and that awful white stuff that we all saw a week or so ago? Is that a sign of it about to crash?
Yeah, that's basically the crashing, and maybe Joe could speak to coloration more, but the blue-greens actually have blue-green pigments in them. You know, that's kind of how they get their name. Okay. So, more information, if you're not getting these data into your inbox and you want them, go to the website, sign up, get them weekly as we put information out through our monitoring, of course, meeting materials and the quarterly e-newsletter. So that's just a,
Sorry, Paul, just real quick, back to the stocking of the fish, not, before we get too far ahead. Was the Fish and Wildlife advised by the board to potentially hold off on stocking of the fish? Knowing that they were gonna go into a hazardous environment?
well, actually, there's been a couple stockings since then. Since the bloom had been in effect. One was, unfortunately, during that family fishing frenzy that they held, and they're well aware that they put 2,000 fish in regatta grounds, in a net, and they all lived. So, with a harmful algal bloom, you can actually have more oxygen than oversaturation. Fish are producing oxygen when they're alive. When they die is when they consume. Now, when they stocked them, would have been the Tuesday, two Tuesdays ago, or whatever it was. The gentleman from the hatchery called his district, confirming again, hey, this bloom is really real. You know, they're totally receive information as well from the district. So did I personally tell them? No, to answer your question. But they were well aware of it before they stocked it. They had a choice, certainly, to stock or not stock. District said, go ahead, stock them. Quickly. Okay.
Are you gonna cover, or is this a good time to cover the hypoxia in a way? The oxygen levels and more than the oxygen levels when we do have the algae level, or is that something we can talk about with the coloration?
So you just want to know about what's at the bottom of the lake?
Just the oxygen, as far as the fish dying out, the oxygen levels of the lake over the bacteria in the lake. Like they're blaming the toxins in the lake.
For the fish?
For the fish dying,
Oh.
but it would be more of an oxygen.
Yes,
hypoxia level.
absolutely. If anything, it would have been oxygen levels. The toxins would not zap out that fish population. Toxins would affect their livers, their neurosystems potentially, your neurosystem, your livers potentially, your dog's neurosystem, your dog's liver system potentially. And that's why they say during a bloom if you're gonna fish and eat fish, to gut them, skin them, and take the heads off, because that's where most of the toxins are concentrated. Fish that would live in a toxic environment would have a chronic impact more gently than an acute one. The acute relationship, fast acting, relative to fish kills is generally almost without variance associated with low oxygen. So, thank you. So, some of you saw these slides, a week ago. Just kind of this picture was floating around. All these are on the back wall. Watershed's changed a lot in 100 years. And that's really what we need to really face up and address. There's been a ton of changes in 100 years. 1895 settlement was opened up in this county, 1895. So the first big blooms were literally 99 years later. So these are things that are modern. Sewage was discharged into Devil's Lake from 1951 to the 1970s. Down here in Ocean Lake, there's the sewage treatment plant, I believe, right there. The effects were starting to be noticed straight away. We had weed studies were started in '63, Devil's Lake Association in '68. Wastewater treatment is closed thanks to the Clean Water Act, mandating the closure of that basically, and the city started compiling its sewer down to Taft area. Sewer could have been built in Devil's Lake for $1.7 million in the 70s estimated. Currently, we're looking at a backbone sewer for Devil's Lake for $4.8 million, which I think is a great number to be shooting for. Clear cuts in the watershed, flooding studies because people started living in the floodplain. Lots of changes. 1972, DEQ did a study on Devil's Lake. Said basically Devil's Lake's the most polluted lake in Oregon. Not a tag you wanted in your community for sure, but just the facts. And what was leading up to that? Wastewater treatment plant, septic systems, agriculture, equals weeds and algae. So the symptoms have always really been pretty obvious to folks at times during the since the 60s. Weeds were the issue in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I certainly was here to witness that. But, and the symptom now, harmful algal blooms, right? Because they're using the same nutrients that the weeds use, and of course with the grass carp introduction, they converted basically all the weeds to algae. So when we look at solutions, we have to look at what the additives are versus focus more so on the outcomes. More studies through the 70s, 80s, diagnostic feasibility study, that's the big one that EPA funded. About $250,000, a lot of information was collected. Paddle was formed, of course still changes to the landscape. They suggested a lot of solutions to our ills, so they had fixes to our ills, as they call them. The weeds were the issue for the most part. That was the visual thing. That's what people, just like we see today, people want to fix the harmful algal blooms. They want to fix the weeds because they were just dominating. They washed up on the shore, they rotted. Who remembers those times? So good, yeah, there's a lot of us in the room.
So,
Yeah.
I had always heard that part of the amount of weeds in the lake was because some of the weeds were intentionally planted by the backcountry.
I hadn't heard that myself, but certainly the non-native plants were not intentionally, wouldn't have been the best move if somebody did intentionally put them.
Right.
Bass,
I just
and-
wondered if
and-
you had ever heard that, because that's what I
yeah,
had
we
always
do know
heard.
that bass and other non-native warm water fish were intentionally planted. And they actually decimated the salmon populations. So
Whoa, I'm sorry,
well,
that's not right.
okay, well, we'll talk about that in another session, but
Well,
that's
you
what
withdraw
Fish and
that
Wildlife
comment, then.
recognizes. So,
That's a bunch of crap.
Jack, it's not, but thank
It
you.
is.
No, it's not.
You-
So
absolutely.
the bass were put in the lake in the late 30s, and by 39, the head of the Fish and Wildlife Department at the time said, his name was Frank B. Wise, I recall this very, very vividly. His quote is like that we basically decimated the trout, so which are the cold water native fish, and that's because they feed on those fish. But that's not what the topic today is about. So there have been introductions of other species for sure. Certainly grass carp were introduced. That's a non-native.
Well, but I was specifically
Yeah,
addressing
the
the
plants.
weed. One reason the weed overgrowth got to the
Yeah.
extent it did was because.
Well, we've never heard that anybody intentionally introduced Eurasian milfoil or any other invasive species weed into the lake. We've never heard that. They came in on boat props, some other lakes. That's how they get it. For people dumping their aquariums, Eurasian milfoils, incidental things like that, and it spreads fast.
That was just what we heard in our family.
Those are typical ways that Eurasian milfoil and other invasive weeds start out in the lake.
Paul, you started out saying that the crappie and bass decimated the salmon, and then your last sentence was that it decimated the trout.
Well,
Trout
yeah.
are fresh and
the-
salmon are salt.
The quote that he used was the trout, so I just tried to be
Okay.
clear.
Well, I
But
don't
the
think you
trout
can change
were,
that to salmon.
yeah, I don't want
from
to
the
change
trout.
his words.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're the native fish. That's what Frank was getting at. Okay, so what were the solutions? Because this was like, we got to get rid of these weeds.
Can I have one other
Quick
thing?
clarifying question.
When the DLWID was established, they had a number of things that was important to them. And one of the things was they were very concerned about the weeds coming out of the lake. And that they had a program that if the weeds got down, if the vegetation level got down to 20%, which is about what a healthy lake would be, then they would start taking out grass carp. And that never happened.
That's true. That did never happen. Yep.
So the optimum lake, one of the potential causes of our problem is that we didn't allow the lake to maintain its vegetation level, which is a sponge against the nutrients coming into the lake.
That's true, and that'll be addressed later on today, so thank you. So these were some of the suggestions. Land use controls, that was the number one thing. If you're gonna try to fix this lake, fix it from the outside. Go up the hill, look what's coming down the hill. That's where we're at today still, I think, with sewers. shoreline protection, those types of things. Block it from getting to the lake in the first place, so you're not living with it, recycling the lake. They suggested some herbicides, limited dredging potentially, and then there was a large dairy in Rock Creek at the time too. So things have changed in the landscape, but other things have changed too, and as the development has continued, stormwater can rise up onto that list too as to the next things that are adding nutrients to the lake. That's what it looked like in the 80s. Completely overgrown with vegetation, dire situation. People were calling out to have something done.
All overgrown is a generalization. It was, the record
Okay,
show
so-
was 52%. So there was 45% that was clear water. I was there during that time. There wasn't a day that I wanted to go out water skating and I didn't do it.
Okay.
So recreation was confined to a smaller area, but it was never decimated.
For you, that's certainly true, but for the larger population, this was unacceptable. This is what
Well, I
drove.
didn't say it wasn't acceptable.
This was what drove Paddle to form. This is what drove the Devil's Lake Association to form in '68. This was the issue that people were hoping to address, and so we'll just leave it at that. There's your symptom of aquatic, the symptom of degraded lake, fishing out weeds as thick as that is. Grass carp get introduced into the lake through the Devil's Lake, through EPA's and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's approval. 10,000 fish were put in 1986, another 17,050 in 1987. They started to deplete the population of weeds, but not to the extent that had been hoped. By 1993, 5,000 more fish were put in. And the second approved planting, some stuff the district was working on right there, logging ordinances that had passed, working on bacterial analysis, helping to ban phosphates from detergents in the state. But by 1984, after that 1993 stocking, the weeds all were eradicated. Now that's the situation we are right now. There's basically zero vegetation on the lake. Less than 1%, I think, is what the count was last summer. That is a system out of balance. That is a system out of balance. Right along with that eradication, we saw this huge bloom of this silly string, I was calling it, what we saw again 2 weeks ago, color stuff too. White and green and just horrible stuff, called the worst bloom ever, right? Certainly probably was. Followed by, again, in '95, the worst bloom ever. So basically, within a few years' time, we went from this to this. The nutrients are still driving this, though. The sunlight is still driving this. Photosynthesis was still driving this. We just had kept in check the weed growth with our lawnmower of a grass carp, right? You keep the weeds in check, nutrients are still there. Something's going to take over. This is what took over. So, 1998, another aerial. Again, I'd encourage people to look at these. They're available online. Pretty informative. This is just a snapshot from the Dee River. And the big thing here, and this is work that Joe did in 2005, following on from work that he'd done in 1993, I think was the year, is sediment core sample. You go down, core out the bottom of the lake, pull it up, figure out the age of that sediment using radiochemistry, lead-210, it's an isotope of lead. They can actually find out how old that sediment is. And basically, by the further you go down, the older the sediment is. 10 centimeters down, just about yay deep, was the sediment laid down in 2000. About 35 centimeters down, about a foot deep, was the sediment laid down 100 years prior. Okay, so that's this window that kind of speaking to. We're talking about this landscape change for Devil's Lake.
Can you clarify, so you're saying there's only been a foot of sediment on the bottom of the lake in the last 100 years?
Yeah, basically a little bit more than that, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So, but what's known, not a foot of sediment. So this is, yes, it is a foot of sediment. Yeah, I'm trying to think through as your question, but what this chart also shows though is the rate of sediment accumulation. Okay, so this is saying sediments are accumulating at an increasing rate. So there's something that's changed that's making more sediment available. And nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus nutrients are also, with the exception of phosphorus, which has a big peak, probably from logging deposition down here. But these trends are shooting straight up too. So we have more sediment accumulating, more carbon, more nitrogen, food for these things to grow, food for weeds to grow, right? That's what caused the weeds to grow in the 80s and the 60s. Most importantly, out of this data set, I think is this next slide. Quick question in a minute, please, hang on. So, this is blue-green algae. This is the stuff you saw out there. This guy right here, Anabina, that's what we saw out there. This is a microscopic organism that lives off sunlight, lives off nutrients, grows in lakes. It's been around for 3.5 billion years probably. At least its cousins have, blue-green algae have. Now, its growth, this is recorded in the sediment layer too. So this is here your 1900 mark again, right about here. Not a lot of that stuff down there at that time. This stuff is preserved in the sediment. As you get to about this era, 1960s, you really start to see a trend. What's driving that trend? Nutrients. We're up here, this is the top of the core, 2005 radio dating. Here's the trajectory. Up, up, up. This is the deposition increasing along this axis, increasing exponentially. Same thing true with this guy. This is Gloetrichia. This is the one that we often commonly see on the lake. It looks like a little pom-pom. You can actually see it. Most of you would have seen it. It started to pick up too, and starts increasing exponentially. Of course, Anabina is these scales aren't the same, but this is a different organism, so the scales are different. But the trends are very, very, very similar. Tina.
And I apologize for this. So, just to clarify, the bottom of our lake is only gotten shallower, for lack of a technical term, by 1 foot in 100 years.
Does that be right, Joe?
Not exactly, so it's a bit more complicated than that. So all this information that you're seeing from Paul came from one site, which is relatively deep.
Okay.
So if you really wanted to find out how sediment has accumulated throughout the lake, you would actually have to have a number of cores so that you could figure out a process called sediment focusing, where we think some of the deeper areas might be accumulating sediment faster. So there is, I can't give you a straightforward answer.
I think that's good enough. Yeah, you had a question there, I'm sorry.
I had a question on the prior slide. I
Okay.
just want some clarification. On the phosphorus,
Mm-hmm.
do I read that correctly, that in the top part of the sediment, it's actually decreasing? Is that what
Well,
that's telling me?
so if we were to eliminate this point,
No, well.
I know, just bear with me for a second.
Okay,
If we were to eliminate this point, call it an outlier, okay, say it was unusual to the rest of the data set, then this line, this is the best fit line for the data, that would be doing basically this, maybe more upright than these are. But with this piece in here, it makes a best fit line not very
okay,
clear.
but the farther to the right it goes
Is-
means more, and the farther
Yes.
to the left. So
Means
what I'm
less.
seeing is those top 3 measurements are decreasing
Right.
in
Yeah,
phosphorus.
if we just look at a short-term, very, very short-term data set of, maybe this is 5 years or something. We
Okay,
might say,
that's
hey, we're
relevant.
done, we're on our way to recovery. But these are also not saying that though too. So there may be more to that question. Mitchell, you had a question?
Yeah, just because Mr. Eller is here and on the Anabina slide, we focus a lot on that top 2 centimeter piece, but if you look at other information in the report, that sample is about 98% water at that height, so I don't doubt this curve, and it's about 1.5 times an increase over the period you're talking, so 150% increase in this particular algae, but it seems like that top one is kind of hard to realistically, send that out and say, in the future, that's the number, because it could very well be that, since that's 98% water, that's more reflective of the conditions of the lake at the time of the sample, and not necessarily
You're
an
right.
accurate
I
prediction.
never interpret a whole lake based on one data point.
Right.
And, yeah, so, we can see some of these top values going from one way or the other, and that's why I try to fit the curves through the entire data set.
It is mostly water, right, about 98%.
Oh, yeah, 98, 99% water, yeah.
So it could have been the condition of the water on the day that that sample was taken, is that what the conversation's about?
Well, there's valid information there for sure.
There's a variety of things. We could collect that sample in such a place that there's either more accumulation of that material or less.
But if that sample would have been taken, for instance, Tuesday of last week, it would have been very different if it was taken Friday of last week.
It would have been different.
Okay.
Yeah.
But these are resting stages too, though. These are the die-offs of the organism. It's not the actual.
Yeah, what you're looking at here are resting cells called aganites. And after.
So what's died and floated?
It's what's like already been down.
Okay.
So it is more so a sediment record than an active.
Water, so, I mean,
Nathan.
Paul, this is in one location on the lake.
This is, and I think, Joe, do you remember where that was taken specifically? But I thought it was out here.
It was mid-lake.
Mid-lake. There's a lot of lake out there. Bloom conditions that would get blown in, say a canal or something, certainly could have been much higher than these would represent. But this is, trying to find data about Devil's Lake. And a mid-lake sample is fairly common for trying to get at the data. Sir.
I'm noticing this data is from 2005. A couple questions. Is that adequate, that we are only doing monitor in 7-year increments? What's adequate?
Yeah, so.
And does the board have funds for it?
So, those are good questions. I think more data is better, certainly. This is, of course, the most recent data set is from 2005, but it records data from over 100 years, too. So I guess that's pretty informative too. So could we do more monitoring specifically for the sediment? Yeah, we could. We are doing more about the current status of the lake. So your answer, yes, we could do more. Is it adequate? I think this still informs the discussion pretty well.
So what's,
as to what the needs are with the
follow-up.
nutrients.
So what's the board's plan for what's adequate for not only this testing, but testing throughout the year? I think a lot of residents don't see that plan on what's adequate.
Yeah.
We identify things, and if there isn't enough money, we go out and get more money. But we first have to be able to identify what the monuments are in the plan that we need to make good decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that the discussions that we'll have henceforth, and again, this isn't a decision-making meeting, will be additional monitoring. And maybe it's sediment, maybe we want to know more about the sediment. Maybe we just want to know more about the week-to-week stuff where people's activities may be impaired, as far as recreational. Maybe it's both. Okay, so we got through this slide. This was really my last slide. My introduction was supposed to be 10 minutes, but with the questions, obviously we're a little behind schedule. So Joe, you are up.
Hey, Paul, before you get started, before Joe gets started, I just wanted to thank you for allowing this to be interactive, because the number of us that were at the meeting on Thursday when David proposed this assumed that this would be an interactive work session.
Yeah.
So
that's been the goal,
applaud you
it's
for
just trying
letting
to
us
also
do that.
move forward.
No,
Glad to hear it's beneficial.
Hi, how you doing, folks? Looks like you're all wide awake this Easter Saturday. Paul survived. Anyway, let's just, start off with the basics of the lake. You probably know these numbers by heart, but, it's just a large shallow lake, and it has a lot of the problems that you see in other shallow lakes. So, one of the things that the board asked me to address today, over here, is the issue of lake stage, and I understand you're having a number of discussions about that. And that's a topic that comes up on a lot of lakes that I deal with, but many of them are hydropower projects, and we're looking at, lake stage changes from 50 feet. So, you don't have that to work with. But nevertheless, I can.
How much analysis did you come up with this? Did you look at the number of septic tanks that are inundated and the shoreline erosion?
No.
And come to conclusions?
No.
You're just repeating what the district's position is?
Well, I know what, if you raise the lake stage on any lake along the coast, you will inundate septic fields that have been saturated for years.
You will.
Well, how do you know they're saturated? The county isn't concerned about it.
I'm just talking from a technical standpoint, and I'm not interested in what the county has to say or things like that. I'm brought here to talk about the lake and what's good and what's bad, and I don't have any stake in whether the lake is high or low. I'm just going to provide my professional opinion about what I see.
I'd like to hear him. It's an educational meeting. I'm constantly interrupting him. I don't know that helps that.
I'd like to know what the pros are here. What about temperature of the lake? If you have higher lake level?
This is a very, I was asked several days ago if I could attend. And so I'm using my accumulated knowledge from working on lakes for 35 years, a number of which are on the Oregon coast. So how about let me talk about this? Maybe the other people would be interested. So, whether you have a high or low lake stage, as I say, it's not necessarily a technical decision, but there are some technical ramifications on what decision you choose to make. And certainly, if I had a boat out here, it would probably make it easier to access my boat and get it in and out of the water. Probably fewer exposed rocks or tree stumps sticking out. And then there's the issue of additional dilution of nutrients in algae that is made possible by greater volume. But when you consider the amount of volume or volume differences that we're dealing with, that's pretty insignificant. And we need much bigger changes to effect a change in what you're seeing in the lake right now. So some of the cons is that usually when we have a high lake stage or a very low lake stage, we can have greater shoreline erosion. So typically, what I recommend is to try mimic the natural cycle of how a lake fluctuates, and that will. But I realize that conflicts in the summertime because you're going to go. Your lake stage would naturally be lowest in the summer when, from a boating standpoint, you probably want it higher. So the other issue is if you keep the lake stage high, it makes it more difficult to establish natural wetland vegetation along the lake. And so at times plants are looking for that fluctuation in stage. So, again, I have no stake in where you, let's skip this one. I can, yeah. So Paul mentioned earlier, your legal max is 9.503 or 9.53. And on the low end, you have a concrete sill that form the basis for the impounding water. The outlet. So that's what we're looking at is your current legal range is simply 1.5 feet. So when we look at a hypsographic curve, and that's just a fancy term for depth versus volume in this case, what we see is by the time we get down to 3 meters or about 10 feet, you have very little volume in the lake. So most of the lake volume is actually stored in, the upper 5 feet or so. And so if we look at drawing the lake down 1.5 foot, that would equal this. And we compute that volume, we're only looking at about 17.5% of the lake volume, which is not terribly small. Really?
Really?
Yeah.
The recreational,
That's a fifth almost.
We think that's
Yeah.
the huge. The recreational pool was for 1,360 acre feet. That is 24% of the lake volume.
What's the recreational pool?
The recreational pool is a permit by the water master to take the level to 9.53. So you lower the lake 25%, that's gonna heat up the lake in the summertime when you're more susceptible to
So
algal
I
bloom.
don't know where the water master came up with this number, but this is based on a detailed bathymetry, and I think it's probably pretty accurate.
So 17.5% less water means 17.5% less dilution of all problems we have, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I have a question.
Right.
Do you know the real resistance to raising the lake water level? What is the resistance to doing that?
As I understand it, it has to do more with recreation water sports. Is that the sentiment?
So I think I can address the question. So that decision that changed the impoundment from 953 to 90 was based on a number of criteria that the board looked at, and this was a couple years ago. Most people in the room recognize that meeting. Was addressing fish and wildlife concerns with impounding water. Was concerning with nutrients coming into run. The biggest question that drove that originally, and Jack actually was the one that made the motion, and it was to get this study done, because we were concerned about investing in the shoreline, okay? We have this shoreline program that we wanted to invest in, but if we are gonna arbitrarily re-raise the lake level to 953, then are we just really dooming ourselves? And that's what drove that erosion study. And
Well,
so
the erosion
the rest
study
of
changed.
the rest of
We
the
had it changed, but
it's not true.
So,
It is true.
it is true.
so should, I don't want to get off topic, but they got a lot of information to go over, and let's let Joe go over it, and then we can kind of have those questions about the section.
Then let us have the time to talk also, because we do have input.
I think lake
Yeah.
levels, by 90% of us are here, so, and all this other stuff's great, but the reality of it is, the lake level's lower and the algae's worse, and Joe just stated it. When you lower the lake level, you're upping the concentration of all our problems. So, anyway.
No, that's not quite what I said.
You
I
didn't?
said
What'd you
all
say? Why
all
don't you
things
clarify?
all things being equal, if you have a lake and you lower it, obviously you have less for dilution. But that doesn't mean operating the lake in a dynamic sense, that lowering the lake leads to greater blue-green algae. That doesn't follow.
You can't prove that either way, though, right?
No, I can't, not with the existing data.
You better get more data.
Oh, I think that's
So,
I really do. I came here to learn, and all I'm hearing is interruptions. Take notes so that you
It's an
can ask your
interactive
question.
work session.
Were you at the meeting, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, when it was pitched to us, it was a workshop. My idea of a workshop is where you kind of get around a table and you decide what things are happening. So let's let you get through, I understand, that makes sense, let's move forward.
Okay.
Let's have our discussion, we got the science on the table. It's a better discussion if it's better informed. He's trying to inform our discussion, so let's give him a chance to do that.
Okay. So, when I look at any lake, I look at the water budget and things of this nature. I see that, there's the data actually is for Otis, almost 8 feet of precipitation, and I would look at that and I would say, wow, any lake in that watershed is not gonna have a problem with blue-green algae because there's so much water available for flushing. And so why are you having these huge blue-green algae blooms in Devil's Lake? And so again, this is very quick and hopefully, but not too dirty, examination of where water is coming and where water is going. And so when you look at some of these numbers, the residence time or so-called flushing rate is about a month and a half to 2 months. KCM, I think, had it about a month and a half in their report. And so a lot of water, in theory, is flushing through the lake. And so that should be moving nutrients out and should be minimizing the blue-green algae blooms. But that's, again, not occurring. And so when we look at the KCM data, this is, they collected this in 1981. We have our inflows here in blue, outflows in orange, and Rock Creek represents 50% of the inflow, total inflow, including precipitation on the lake itself, into the lake, and with everything else being relatively minor. And then obviously, most of the D River dominates the outflows.
Hey Joe, can you define KCM for people?
Oh, KCM did a diagnostic and feasibility study for Devil's Lake it was published in 1983, and it's available on the
That's
Devil's
just the
Lake
acronym
website.
of the company, KCM. Kramer,
Kramer, Chin, and Mayo, which was bought up by Pepper. Okay. So this is the watershed boundary for the lake, and includes all the tributaries, topographic input. This divide here between Rock Creek and the rest of the lake is really critically important to understanding why some of the problems are occurring, in my opinion. And so, what I've outlined here in red is what I view as the effective drainage area to the lake. And what I mean by that is that with Rock Creek coming in right near the outlet, there's a high potential for short circuiting. And so depending on the wind, if you have either light wind or wind from the north, the tendency, you would think, is that most of this water from Rock Creek is just going to head right out the D River. And so consequently, now if you have a southerly wind, that can drive water up. But there would be a lot of times where water from the D River really never interacts with much of the lake proper. And so, these are the areas that I would focus on in terms of trying to improve the system and with that understanding of the hydrology, focus your efforts accordingly. And you can model this if you wanted the board wanted to spend money. I love doing that. So I don't represent any company, but I really do like collection of data. We were going to break this up, Paul. Or did you want to stop right now and just talk about lake levels a little bit more?
I think it's up to you. I think what you.
Well, I think it's up to the folks.
Okay.
Well, I think
People like to talk about lake level a little bit more. Let's do that.
Question?
Well, your erosion, I hate to mention this, there's probably a lot of people in the room that are gonna be a little angry, but the erosion, whether the lake's high or low, does that occur because of possibly a lot of activity from the wake boats? I live along the lake front and I've been rolled over in my kayak. I can't tell you how many times 4-foot waves come crashing up over my patio all summer long.
I can speak to that a little bit too, but if you want to hit that.
Go ahead.
So when we had that study done, what was shown was that the summertime erosion, which you would think wouldn't be much because we don't have those big winter storms, was 20% of the total impacts to the lake. So there's a fifth of the impacts. And what was most indicative of that is that the shorelines that were getting eroded were on all faces of the lake. versus the impacts from, say, the big southwest winds coming up the lake, that erosion had been done for 15,000 years, basically. When we get the big wakeboards, it's another dynamic. So yes.
And they occur equally as much whether the water's high or low.
Well, they may occur more when they're high. I don't know because of people's frequent, comfortability as to going near a shoreline.
It washes clear over my patio even during the low water.
Yeah. Yeah, a 3-foot wave is significant on Devil's Lake, especially when the average depth is 8 feet. And as you get closer to the shoreline, that wave starts building and breaking, and it's all about wave energy. So the wave energy was 20% of it lake-wide was coming from those recreational uses.
Although honestly, the erosion report, the fact-based stuff that was in there was based on a study on waves. And I don't mean to diminish the boat wave thing, but in order to show, to illustrate what theoretical larger waves would do, the board asked that that be inserted, and they call it a sensitivity analysis. So some of the numbers you're hearing are from these numbers that were, well, what if it was 4 times bigger than what they say it was going to be, and that's some of the numbers are there. However, it's true, the sensitivity analysis. But the primary, it says the primary reason for summertime erosion is that it's wind wave driven. There's contribution from both, but primarily wind wave. And it's the biggest contributor to erosion because, as you say, it's against all the unarmored areas, because in the summertime, it hasn't been as big of an issue there, so people haven't armored their shoreline.
Yeah.
And also, it's much of the undeveloped, like to say, part.
Yeah,
So-
true.
So I don't
So
want you to.
the 20% is, again, the recreational impact, that was the question. And what was shown was that, though, that we were doing it 360 versus doing it in those kind of, like I said, the southwest direction where the erosion had been happening for as long as the lake had happened. So certainly a new impact to Devil's Lake. Joe, did you want to add something to that? Because I kind of jumped in there because I...
No, that's fine.
Paul, as we speak, for the last 4 months, it appears like to me that it's within this drainage area. There's been logging occurring, 2 sites, and I don't know the total number of trucks running, but somewhere's around 8 trucks. And the turnaround time is approximately 2 hours for each. And so I don't have any idea about the volumes that are coming off there, but there's a potential for very dramatic erosion. And I think we just got an example up there in Washington of what that can do. So I don't know your answer to that problem.
It's complex. You know, the Forest Practices Act, I think, Joe, maybe you know the date, it's like 1990 something is when that came in. And so those practices were to improve these types of forestry behaviors that basically allowed, you know, clear cuts across stream beds, and a lot of it I think was just directed at sedimentation and fish issues and such. There's a lot of discussion henceforth from that as to if that's adequate enough. Certainly not something we can talk about today, but it's definitely a consideration. You know, we saw in that one slide where I alluded to the phosphorus being, you know, a foot deep, the big plume of phosphorus. Well, that correlated with the activity record of intense forestry in the watershed, right? So if we have, again, intense forestry, as you know, we have pretty intense, it's still active today. I hear the beep beep, that's all forestry activity up the hill. That's certainly a potential source of nutrients, sediments, water quality issues.
Hey, Joe, could you back up one slide? Because since we have lake level on the table, we can maybe ask a couple questions. Just the one that had the pros and cons there. A couple questions for you. So on the cons, greater shoreline erosion. So, you know, what percentage of the lake, 75% of the lake is seawall?
85.
85%? So those seawalls were built, and this is from the contractors that I've talked to in town, at about some were built at a 10-footer if they were built in the 92 or area, but most of them were built in 953. Can we agree to that?
I don't have the specific data myself,
But
but I
no,
do know that
In general, since we
the
talked a lot of
issue
generals
with
here,
wall
in general, the wall is built. The
is that,
contractor came in and said, I'm gonna build a wall, and the seawall is going to have to cover a certain, if a contractor's gonna build a wall, he's gonna address wintertime and summertime
I would think
wave
so.
erosion.
I would think
So the majority of the walls were built at a midpoint of 953, I would assume. And now,
Or higher, because
Or higher, exactly.
winter level's 10.4 on average, and when the sand is piled into the deep river, the lake goes 11
goes
feet,
way
12
higher.
feet.
Yeah,
If
so-
we didn't dredge it, it would go
that's what I mean. So
14
when-
feet potentially even.
So my question to you, Joe, lowering the lake down to below its 10-year average, where people have developed the shoreline, and the water's lower, what effect does the lower water have on those seawalls
Yeah,
and erosion with the lower water?
Yeah, I thought I stated, but maybe I didn't state it clearly enough, but what I was referring to is that you will probably have greater shoreline erosion under the extreme conditions, under high and under very low. And as you describe it, if you retain a very low level, let's say 8 feet for an extended period, and there's considerable wave action or wakeboard action or whatever, yeah, there's possibility of even greater erosion because you might undercut some of these seawalls.
Okay, so to finish my thought, what if a typical homeowner, if we got the level at a rate, whether it's gonna be where it is now, or whether we're gonna get it back up to where most people are familiar with, whether it's their dock, their seawall, their boat lift, or navigation. And then, if we hired a guy like you to come out and say, okay, we're gonna leave it at 953, that's our maximum impoundment, but we've got a few areas of erosion that are gonna be affected by that. You think we could do target erosion mitigation if we knew right where the level is gonna be, where maybe we can find the areas that are eroding? Because if you're at 85% of the lake is seawall, and if we lower the level, it's gonna affect that seawall. It makes sense to me that we get it up to 953, and then we go after, target some of the erosion area with more seawalls, more vegetation planting, whatever we need to do. Is that an option?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, there are a number of techniques for creating offshore barriers to reduce wave energy in just those types of areas. So it's a not uncommon thing.
Is that what you do for a living?
No.
Okay, well, you could direct us into somebody, so we
I
can
can
take.
tell you someone who would do.
So we
who
could
do
go to
that.
a certain homeowner or property owner and say, look, we understand you have some erosion. We're gonna deal with it, because we don't want erosion. And that's why 85% of the people that live on the lake have dealt with it, because you had to, correct? That's why we have so many seawalls. We have seawalls for a reason. You just don't spend money for a seawall because it's not necessary.
I'd just like to interject one obstacle to that, unfortunately, and that is the fact that the state doesn't just go out and improve seawalls. Just like in the 1990s, the forest practices changed. The practices to improve the lake and have like maybe erosion abatement have changed too. So the seawall options are, I think, diminished, and that's why with the vegetation efforts, vegetation holds soils, and that's why we're.
I don't think we're not necessarily talking about going out and putting seawalls in, we're talking about mitigation planting vegetation.
Yeah.
Randy did a nice job.
And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And where do you get the best benefit? Where does the shoreline benefit the most from those plantings? And that's from a fluctuating shoreline. That's where
It's
those
just gonna
plants-
fluctuate no matter what, if you're impounded at whatever level.
Yeah, that's
it is,
fine,
right?
but
It becomes that still water height. So if you're pinning something down and you're just hitting it right there. Now, nature in the summer, in the wintertime is going to go above that. So you may have, go ahead.
there's not that much difference in fluctuation between 6 inches.
There isn't that much.
Okay.
There isn't. This is what the whole argument has been about, and frankly.
No, fluctuation
The,
is for the erosion is what you're saying.
well, it's both. It's so, it allow, if you, so how do you get the plants to grow the best? If you're gonna use that as your solution.
Stability of the shoreline.
Yeah, stable shoreline.
Not going
By,
up and down.
well, no, the plants are used to, what they wanna do in the summertime is grow out to the lake, right? That's what the plants are doing.
85% of the lake has a seawall, so unless we want to tear it.
So
we
again,
wanna
that's
tear
what
it
I'm
down,
saying
we
is
can't.
how, if you go apply for a new seawall, you may not get that now. Right, so there's
Well, but let's
expert in
deal
the
with
room
what
that
we
just
have.
told
What we
us.
have, what my whole point is,
So
what
we're
we
trying
have
to
is
find long-term
85%.
solutions.
85% of the lake has a seawall.
Well, it's not that high, but yeah,
Yes, it
there's a
is.
lot.
Okay, so let's.
It is close, maybe it is 85, you're right, it's
I wanna
closer.
do shoreline
16.5% in the study.
Yeah, okay.
16.5% was not seawall.
Yeah, it's a ton.
There you go.
So back to my point, we've got an expert here. We've lowered the lake down, and I know from, and Nate can talk to this, there are seawalls that are degrading, and there's a ton of sediment from those seawalls going into the water because we lowered them down. So unless we want to get together as a team and yank out all the seawalls, we've got to deal with what we're dealing with. And lowering the lake level is just one of the many factors, in my opinion, that you guys didn't consider the fact that all of this water and this wave action that you talk about and the summer winds are degrading all the seawalls and adding, doesn't a degraded seawall add to the erosion and the sediments of the lake?
Sure. Yeah, they're short-term fixes, they don't last forever. And that's why if you want to encourage vegetation, a natural shoreline is more
How do
resilient.
you do vegetation on the other side of the seawall? That's my question.
You start planting it. That would be a good start.
Well, how do you plant it?
That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem.
The problem
You've
is
isolated,
we're not getting rid
you've
of the
isolated the shoreline from.
So you're telling us,
We just
from
planted- we
homeowners,
just
we need to
planted-
get the seawalls out, is what
We
you're
just
telling me.
planted a project on the other side of the seawall, knowing that there's sediment above that rock wall that's eroding and it's losing its strength, because the thing was put in the 80s probably.
And I don't see there's anything wrong with doing that.
No, absolutely, that's what we want. We want
that's where-
vegetation
that's where this
from
comes
we need vegetation throughout the whole
If you're
landscape.
planting vegetation at the end of the seawall, let me just make sure I'm covering you guys. And then you lower the lake, okay, and the wave action comes in, isn't the wave action gonna deteriorate the roots of anything you're gonna plant, that is just gonna dissipate? I mean, I can see planting aquatic vegetation, but that's gotta have water on it. Once you lower it, then that action, I mean.
Talking about wetland plants.
And it pounds it, and it pounds it, and it pounds it, you're gonna lose that.
Plants don't last forever, you're right. Neither do seawalls. And so if you're gonna start restoring the shoreline, and your options are limited to more natural methods, wouldn't you wanna provide the best opportunity for those methods to be successful?
Well, so you're saying we need to rip our seawalls out?
No, I'm not saying that. They're gonna fail eventually.
They're gonna fail because you're holding the lake low.
They're gonna fail
and
eventually
undermining all
regardless,
its
right?
No, they're not, you can
They're not.
rebuild them, I mean, they're
You
not.
can maintain your seawall.
Well,
This is
that was the issue
how
with what I just mentioned, that
This,
we heard.
this man has a comment.
Well, I just think,
Actually, I was
it feels
too
like
bad
some
to
people
back
are
and forth.
assuming that a higher lake level will cause less erosion with their seawalls. and I'm just not sure that that's the case. Well, I think you'll have erosion with your seawall, no matter if the lake is at the highest level or some other level.
You have erosion where water meets the earth.
Right.
If you have a seawall, the water is meeting the seawall. You're not gonna have erosion. What they've done is they've lowered it down to the bottom of everybody's seawall.
So it's eroding the
So
bottom
now
of
it's
it.
Saying that it's worse when it's lower.
Yes.
I'm not sure that that's the case.
It is okay. I can show you a lot.
When the level is higher, it's moving.
Okay, let's have some hands up.
What our expert just told us is you have greater erosion at the extremes, 9.5 and the 8.0.
It's 10 feet is the stream.
Our extremes are 9 and 5.
So Tina,
So, Joe, just I have 2 points, and I'll try to make them quick, and Brian just touched on one of them, is that I feel like the message that it is, being represented by the district is that 9.5 is the extreme, and my understanding is that 9.5 is not the extreme on the high end. That we're talking more at 10 feet or 10.1.
10
And from the information I've gathered just in the last week or so, that you know, the lows are 8.3 to 8.5. Is that fair? Correct. Close enough?
I think that is pretty fair, yeah.
So my estimation then, and just using common sense, is that 953 is kind of an average, and I realize that's what we impound, and one of the things I'm interested in is how much water is flowing into the lake, because I keep hearing natural hydrology is our answer, and I'm not sure where I lie on that thing, but my question is that are we gaining anything by going below 9.5? And I appreciate your pros and cons, but I guess what I see with those is again, the extremes. And I think what I heard last Thursday night, what I'm hearing again today, is that we don't want extreme highs, and we don't want necessarily extreme lows. Those may occur, but I think what you're hearing is that give the people the 9.53 and what is it hurting? And so far I've heard erosion and backlash from boats, disturbs, kayakers, and paddleboarders. That's the two main things that I've heard, either here or from talking to board members. I'm just not sure. I've heard a lot of I think, I feel, it seems, and I guess I'm looking for a little bit more science. And you kind of gave it to us of what you're showing there is the extremes. But in your professional opinion, and you're probably the most professional person in here that I know, does 9.53 or 9 foot make a hill of beans difference in those cons?
No.
And then my only other comment is I think the Save Our Shoreline is a terrific program, and I'm willing to go out and volunteer my time to plant things, because I mean, that's simple science. What I don't agree with is, I don't know anybody in this room that owns a house on the lake or has a lake view even, that wants to plant a spruce tree or a willow tree in front of their house.
That's a problem, yeah.
And, you know, Rock Creek, I own 35 acres on the back of the lake, and Rock Creek runs right through my property. And when ODFW contacted me and said, can we do a habitat thing on your creek, I said, absolutely. And they said, we wanted to plant spruce trees. I said, hell no. I play on that creek, my kids play on the creek. I don't want spruce trees. I mean, they're dangerous, and not to mention obnoxious. But certainly there has to be something else we can plant on the lake that we can recommend to people that somebody's going to want in front of their property or on their property.
Well, there's a whole list on that back table.
No, and I appreciate that.
That actual shoreline planting guide was developed pre all these lake levels.
And I'm not saying that those aren't the two trees that serve the purpose the best, but there has to be and I mentioned this to David and Randy, there is an environmental factor here, absolutely. There is a recreational factor here, and there is an economic factor here. And I think anything we do has to address those three things completely, and not just environmentally, not just recreational.
Yeah, it's difficult because what we've lost
No, I agree, I
are
get that.
200-foot Sitka spruce forests inside of 100 years.
But nobody wants to
And so
live
the
behind
change
a
that has to
200-foot
occur to
Sitka
get
spruce.
back to something even
Shoot,
in a
Randy
relative
cut
balance
one down
is
in
pretty
his yard.
significant. Jim, you had a question?
David, sorry. Randy.
Actually,
Yours
it
is
was more than
long.
that, but, yeah, I just want to do a little time check. I think, great discussion on the lake level. I think we learned some new things. I've taken some notes. I do think that we want to move on so that we can see what we can do about the harmful algae blooms outside of just this one topic area, because there's still a lot of information.
Let this guy in the corner talk, he does
Jim,
his
yeah,
arm up.
go ahead. You had a quick question.
Well,
Quick
you know,
point.
I haven't seen the agenda, so maybe my question and comments are more appropriate if we're gonna talk about algae blooms. But I would like some clarification in a public meeting. As I understand it, there's a report that the Devils Lake Water Improvement District has that says septic tanks contribute 25% of the nutrients, if I'm using the right terminology, to Devils Lake. And I've also been told for a number of years, and finally had it somewhat confirmed by the board, that the nutrient load in the bottom of Devil's Lake due to sediment, nitrates and phosphates that are trapped in that sediment are equal to, and I heard you say one time, Paul, 50 years of nitrates and I've heard that be as much as 200 years of nitrates, and I've been told that those nitrates would be released back into the lake should the nitrate levels coming into the lake be reduced. And so I'm asking for a clarification, and I'd like to make one more comment on that. And I don't know if our guest here has a way of clarifying that, or if you can clarify it, Paul, but
Okay, so
I
it's really
think
quick
that's a basic.
backhand. So the KCM report, the 1983 Diagnostic and Feasibility Study, pointed to those numbers, 25% for the nitrates, I think it was 14 for the phosphorus.
From septic tanks.
From septic systems.
Septic.
Exactly, yeah.
And I will be talking about the sediments and your question when.
You've got a lot of data slides, and I think it's really time to get to them, that we'd like to look at.
Joe, can I? So as long as there's time after we hear this gentleman's comments to have a public discussion, I'll be glad to hold the next part of my comments until that point. But
Okay, why don't we do that?
Okay, I appreciate that.
So is John up now?
He would be, yeah, on aeration. I'll get it queued up. Okay, thanks. John's up.
Thanks a lot, folks. This is one of the best crowds I've seen as far as stakeholders in the lake and the condition of the lake. Pretty well educated, you folks have done a lot of study. You got a situation that's probably about 100 years old. You've got an encroachment by human beings like yourselves, with septic systems, a lot of nutrients, a lot of evolution going on here. Paul didn't really give me a chance to give you a critical advice, but I come from the aquaculture field. I'm looking at it from the fish perspective, okay? Now you're looking at all this other stuff. I didn't bring any hazard algae bloom information, nothing like that. But what I think I brought you was a solution that you've all been pretty much waiting for. I work with Keaton Industries. We've been involved about 30 years studying fish, shrimp, doing different projects all over the world. Finding lakes like this is what we look for. Devil's Lake, you hear? This isn't working. How do you turn this on? Where we press it?
Paul? No, we're just the right.
It's not working at all.
Shut off.
Goes down.
You just-
Okay, so this here lake, Devil's Lake, we went over a lot of different things on this lake already, which was great. I find it fantastic. What we find is a watershed here, coming in, flowing in, predominantly down here. As I draw this says, it creates a bit of an eddy. There's some kayakers here. When you go down the river, you'll get into an eddy and you'll be able to back up and hang out. But that's the force of water moving. So this is keeping all this stagnated up here. Nothing's coming in here. If we had Kiewit construction and we had $10 million, we would either put a pumping station here and pump up to the headwater. Force all your water down once a year. You guys don't have that kind of money. Okay. What's wrong with the problem here? We got an ecosystem that isn't imbalanced because it isn't a traditional ecosystem. We don't have headwaters, we don't have reservoirs, we don't have lakes, we don't have streams, we don't have creeks. We just have a lake that used to be a bog. The BOD level is not being met, the biological oxygen demand. This pushes all your fish to the upper surface because of the heavier molecules at the bottom, whether it be ammonia, nitrogen, NO2, NO3. The heavy molecules are in the bottom. The high nutrient reloading resulting in algae blooms and green water. Dying plants, animals, buildup of sludge in organisms. Eutrophication. You can probably almost guess that the headwater, which is supposed to be headwater, is probably highly eutrophic. It's dead. This is a good diagram. This is what you have now. You have a dead bottom. I always say to people, the heart of a lake is the bottom. The lungs are the column. The surface is the exudate, the skin. It takes in all the vitamin D. Well, you have a highly eutrophic lake. A lot of nutrients on the bottom. Nothing's alive, it's dead. What happens is all your nutrients and stuff go to the bottom, and that's the beginning of the end of the lake. You're going to get the algae blooms. You're going to get some really nasty stuff. What we do, we want to bring the bottom to life. We want to bump the oxygen level. We want to make it habitable for animals and plants. By doing this, you bring the whole lake to life. Whatever problems plague your lake, the total lake rehabilitation system can mitigate them and restore your lakes healthy, utilizing only natural processes without using chemicals. Now, I don't use any chemicals. We've never used chemicals. We only use natural stuff. Keen's lake bed subsurface aeration system is one of them. Using a good subsurface diffuser and different microbial aids. Bacteria. Enhancing the bacteria population so we can get it to digest. This is a typical Keaton system. It wouldn't particularly be the one for this lake, but it's a bottom diffuser. But if you notice something about this bottom diffuser, it has holes all the way around the end. It looks kind of like a jet engine. So when we plumb this, it goes right back to the box, a single hose for a single diffuser. But what it does, as the physics behind it is, when a nice diffuser inflates, it draws into lateral zone water and pushes it to the surface as well. So we're mixing constantly. But we're also suspending the solids in the lake. By suspending the solids in the lake, we allow the natural degrading, natural bacteria being hyperoxygenated and doing their job, but then also if we supplement bacteria, it's a driving force for them to do their job, which is digest out the lake.
Excuse me, what are you diffusing?
Excuse
Is
me?
it lake water you're diffusing?
We're diffusing air into the lake. What we're going to do is, our plan is to turn your lake into a giant aquarium. The best thing you guys got going is you got grass carp, because when we're done, everything wants to grow. So you guys got lawnmowers in the lake already, so we don't have to worry about a proliferation of fauna. All we have to do is make sure we have a good biological oxygen rate to degrade the muck on the bottom.
So those things go in the bottom of the lake?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so what we have is self-weighted tubing. Comes in 500-foot rolls. It's fused with clay. So don't put any lead in the lake. It's fishing hook proof. It's about $1.30 a foot. You need 100,000 feet. But then I told you we need bacteria. Now, much like your gastrointestinal system, a lake operates similar to that. So what we want to do as humans is we eat our yogurt, probiotics, keeps our bacteria alive. A lake, the same thing. We got a lot of bacteria problems, good bacteria, bad bacteria, heavy nutrients, and want to mitigate that. So what we do is we can augment it with bacteria and start digesting the lake. I hear the word sediment. When I use the word sediment, I'm down to silica and sand, rock, stuff like that. You the word we use is sludge. That's the correct term. That's what you have. It's not sediment, it's sludge. Yeah, you have sediment, but it's down here, where it comes in from the logging practices. Up here you have sludge, degraded organics, fish poop, leachate from the fields, the houses. We gotta mitigate that. So that means you need a high biological oxygen level. This is some of our pictures of the waste of sludge. Nope. Okay. Our recommendations are this. No less than 20 aeration systems positioned around the lake. No less than 20. Each system has 1/3 horsepower compressor, has 4 of them in each box. Each one of those pumps will go out to a manifold of 4 diffusers. And those are positioned throughout the entire lake, turning into a giant aquarium.
So is that 80 diffusers total?
80 total.
80?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. And how much are those each?
We'll get to the price.
Oh, okay.
You may all have to call your bank. The key highlight aeration system, 4 rocking piston compressors, 7.5 CFM, okay, at 5 PSI. The carbon footprint of these are pretty substantial compared to the tasks we have now. For what we're going to do, cost for dynamics, what it's going to do, very good. They're in a recycled plastic cabinet. They have a blower inside, it keeps the engines cooled. It's an industrial on and off switch with a timer, 4 distribution lines with backflow preventers, and pressure relief valves, and pressure gauges. Basically, it's similar to this box here. These would not be diffusers, you'd be using like the quad. That's 4, there'd be 4 pumps in here, pushing 4 sets of 4 positioned throughout the lake.
How deep water do those diffusers operate in? What's your
Well,
range?
there's always a discussion about the maximum depth of the diffuser. I have these at 45 feet and 60 feet. Okay, because we're using a rocking piston, we can push the air down. Now, if we're using a rotary vane, you couldn't do that. You probably couldn't get past 1 atmosphere. But because we are using a rocking piston, we go down to 45 feet.
So what depth would they be in our application, our lake?
Well, your application is going to be throughout the whole lake. So you can imagine it's going to be at that 22-foot level and also at that 8-foot level.
Yeah, let that one.
Could you start this program with fewer than the 80?
We'll get into that, sir. I'll probably have most of your questions answered, but at the end I'll give you a chance. I've been threaded with only 15 minutes. Okay, so the power cost, that's something everyone's going to ask about. Power cost, $2.59 per day. Okay, but now we got to times it by 20. So we get 20 systems, $51.80 per day. 30 days, $1,554. 1 year, $18,648. Filter change, $1,040. Service for the equipment, good housekeeping, that'd be something we'll negotiate with you. And all parts change out quickly, 2-year warranty on every one. Now, I didn't get a chance to tell you what I do.
John, let me, how many kilowatt hours is that? Those numbers based on?
That's 1 8-hour period from the beginning, and it just times down by the year.
Well, okay, well, in what rate?
Or I mean, 24-hour period.
What rate?
That'd be what we're billing in Fort Collins, Colorado. I'll have to get that number to you. So it varies wherever you're billing. Now, I take care of a lot of lakes, big lakes. I don't even come to your house unless you got 1 million gallons, okay? We do reservoirs, we do HOAs. I picked this one because this is high density, much like your folks. High density lake. All the grass around this lake is at 39 degrees, okay? And they fertilize with best turf spray. Every year, pallets. Everything from this HOA dumps into that lake. So everything everybody does. When I got to this lake, it was it was hyper-eutrophic. It smelled very bad. Water was black, fish die-offs, everything. What we did was we started a third of the lake back here, and we put in the diffusers. Now, if you look at the blow from Google Earth, you'll see these dots. Those are all diffusers working in that lake. We started back here with one system, then we did another system here, another system here, another system here.
John, how big is that lake?
This lake right here is 20 acres.
20?
20 acres. It's got a mean depth of maybe 9 foot. Visibility 100% year round.
A lot of houses on it, too.
A lot of houses.
What's the acreage of that lake?
This 20 acres. And we got 32 diffusers in it currently. And that's run by 9 1/3 horsepower compressors.
And those
They
run
run
day and night?
24/7.
They run day and night?
Well, it's like this. I know most of you have a fish aquarium, right? When do you turn the air off your fish aquarium? When do you turn it off? Do you turn it off whenever you want, or you got it on a timer?
When you clean it.
Okay. You don't turn them off. If anybody knows anything about electrical motors, the more you turn them off and turn them on, the more you wear them out. Run them 24/7, they won't wear out. I got motors that are running 7 years in the field right now. But these can be rebuilt.
Can I ask, are they solar? What's the power source?
Powers,
$30,000 a year.
Yeah.
Coal.
So you
This is a
have
lake.
to run wires. You have to-
There's no wires in the lake. All the power is dumped to the box, okay? No navigational hazards, no power in the lake,
Bluetooth? How are you doing?
okay? It's all done with the box, the motors are in the box, the power is dropped to the box, the tubing goes out to the lake.
What runs the motors?
There's big power, we gotta have power drop.
Well, then you gotta put cables in the.
No, so I think
No.
what you have is you have a shoreline application where a pump is.
Let me go
you have
back.
tubing, and to that shoreline application, you have a power
This
line.
box.
Yeah, so that's the basics, and this is just
There's
meant
20
to
of
give
these
us the
positions
overall
around the lake,
information.
okay? Each one of these has 4 1/3 horsepower compressors.
Power
Okay,
line
right.
trenched to it.
These go in the bottom of the lake. They're in a quad position. 1 1/3 horsepower compressor drives 4 diffusers.
From the
Okay?
shore, right?
From the shore. It's, okay, the tubing is
It's
lead.
like your fish tank, the compressor is outside the fish tank, the hosing runs into the fish
Exactly.
tank where you pump the.
And it's fish hook resistant. Okay, so you're not gonna get fish hook in it. Air takes least pass resistance, so the air is gonna be directed right to them. There's gauges we can regulate. If it's in a shallow area, we may wanna regulate it. If it's in deep area, we may wanna go away.
Approximately how long does it take before it becomes this wonderful clear lake?
Well, that's the great thing about air. The day you turn it on is the day it changes.
So with all due respect, the lake you showed us had a ratio of 1 diffuser per 1 acre.
Right on.
And what you're proposing for our lake is 1 diffuser for 80 acres.
No, we're using a different diffuser. We're using a quad diffuser, pushes a lot more water. It's pretty much an industrial application. This is more of a smaller lake than we do the single diffusers. With this one, there'll be quad diffusers.
Have you
So
done a lake
one
that's
1/3
680
compressor
acres?
will push it. We just did a reservoir for Marin County Water District. This is drinking water. It had solar beams. They were failing miserably, they were having planktonic algae blooms. Okay? We came in and put our diffusers in. The water tech said, I watched the meters move as soon as you turn them on.
How large a lake have you, how large a project have, what's your largest project?
That'd probably be Marin Water District. That's
And how
the
many acres was
reservoir.
that water?
I think that was over 100 acres. It's a huge system.
So we're 6 times that, so we'd be 6 times larger than your largest project?
Yeah, it's, your project doesn't bother me for size, okay? It's not an issue. It's just a matter of whether you guys can afford it. It's gonna cost you $400,000. okay?
Grab a check tomorrow.
For 400 grand. I say you go quarter, $100,000 increment, start in the crappiest part of the lake, and we all know where that is. You know what, I can tell you where it is.
Is this approved for
Right here.
sensitive salmon habitat?
What's that?
Is this approved for sensitive salmon habitat?
Yeah. What's it gonna do to the fish? Make them stronger? I mean,
You-
what are you gonna do when you introduce oxygen? What are you gonna do to anything that's living in that pond?
Have you got it approved by
You guys all went
ODFW?
science, listen. What are you gonna do if you introduce oxygen? You're gonna be able to run faster. You're gonna be able to jump higher.
You increase the bass
Microorganisms are-
population.
What's that?
You increase the bass population.
No, you're gonna make everything happy.
Yeah. And bass and
Anything
salmon.
that breathes out in that water is gonna be happy, including microorganisms.
We gotta kind of move on. This was meant for an overview of aeration. You know, this is a lot. John could have done this in the 2 hours.
I'm not just narrating.
And we're not able to provide all that time, so
Let me wrap it
the
up.
idea is the introduction.
I'm not an aeration salesman like I don't make you sound. I do lake biology on a large scale. Okay? I take care of some of the most prestigious wineries in the country. Okay? I take care of Marin Water District. I do municipalities. We got a dredge, harvester, or a full line operation. I'm not a salesman for aerators, okay? We take an active stance in biology.
You get a permit for it through ODFW?
And I wasn't invited here. I got notified by one of you folks to be here, okay? I saw Paul 2 years ago. I gave him all this information. None of you ever saw it. These are different cutter heads. If you guys want to address your banks.
John, let me ask you,
This is if we want to do a geochi.
you showed the diffuser, I'm back on the aeration. How close is that, is the mechanism that releases the oxygen? How close
Air.
is that? I realize the diffuser sits on the bottom.
Right up.
How close is the bubbler to the bottom?
It's on the bottom.
Is it sitting on the
We
bottom?
want it on the bottom because what it does, it takes the lateral zone water, the heaviest molecules, and we want to pull it into that thing and we want to shoot it to the top. We want to agitate all the sediment on the bottom. We don't want to flock it and hide it. We want it to move around. We want the microorganisms to be charged. We want them to self-digest.
All right, so, I mean, from my reading on this, initially, you're gonna disturb a lot of phosphorus in the water.
Exactly. What's all that?
Well, you're gonna, you know.
Initially, you're going to get
You don't need to know that you're probably gonna.
initially you're going to get a little
The
odor.
problem's gonna be worse.
Hydrogen sulfide gas is what you're going to smell. We're going to start stirring it up, then we're going to, hey, we use bacteria. But once you start charging that oxygen environment, all the way down to the microorganism level, you can start getting changes in the lake. Okay?
Wouldn't
The change is going to be
If
digestion.
the oxygen's gonna work, wouldn't it stimulate what existing microbes you've got?
Exactly, exactly.
So why would you want to introduce a competing microbe to?
No, we're gonna introduce something that will go after the nutrients on the bottom. Exactly. That's all they're designed to do. To go after.
Aren't there microbes there that are sort of latent that should be rejuvenated?
I don't know if it's hypertrophic, you think it'd be dead? Get a plastic bag over the neck, can't hear, can't breathe.
Is it
It's an
possible?
anaerobic environment.
Is it possible to rejuvenate the existing microbes, bring them back?
You're gonna do that naturally, yes. But I would, in some of the worst areas, in some of the coasts, I would put down a bed of pellets, bottom dwelling bacteria, that aggressively go after the conditions you just talked about.
How much is that?
Bacteria program for this lake, you figure you're probably looking at about $360 for 5-gallon pail.
That
Expensive.
doesn't tell us how much.
How far does it
Well, what we do is when we come into a lake, we do what we call a biological study.